What happens when your brother's favorite weapon gets turned against him? My 17-year-old brother Travis used to handle disappointment like a normal person. Then he discovered that threatening to hurt himself got him whatever he wanted, and it was like he'd found a cheat code for life. It started small. If you don't let me go to Logan's party, I'll cut myself. Mom caved instantly. Then it escalated. If I don't get the new Xbox, I don't see the point in living. Dad drove to Best Buy at 10 p.m. Every family dinner became a hostage negotiation. When he got a B on his chemistry test, he locked himself in the bathroom with a bottle of pills, screaming through the door until Mom called the school to demand a retake. My little sister Grace learned to forge Travis's handwriting perfectly, filling out his worksheets at midnight to remove stressors from his life. Mom developed panic attacks. Dad started sleeping in his car just to escape the constant emotional terrorism. Our house became a prison where Travis was both the warden and the only prisoner that mattered. The breaking point came during Grace's 13th birthday dinner. She'd been planning it for months, her first real teenage party. Halfway through cake, Travis realized no one had asked about his college applications. He stood up slowly, pulled out his pocket knife, and held it to his wrist. Guess nobody cares if I make it to college anyway. Grace's friends watched in horror as her birthday became another Travis show. Please, I said, my voice steady. This is Grace's day. Can we talk about college tomorrow? He pressed the blade closer. Or I could just end it now since I'm such an inconvenience. I watched Grace shrink into herself, her special day destroyed, her friends already texting their parents to pick them up early. That night, I made my decision. If Travis wanted to weaponize mental health, he needed to know what it felt like to be on the other side. I spent weeks preparing, researched his college interview schedule, practiced my performance in the mirror. The beautiful thing about emotional manipulation is that it only works on people who care about you. The morning of Travis's Yale interview, the one he'd threatened to kill himself over if he didn't get a perfect recommendation letter, I put my plan into action. I came downstairs looking hollow-eyed, movements deliberately slow, skipped breakfast. When Travis mentioned his interview at 2 p.m., I just stared through him. Whatever, I mumbled. Won't matter soon anyway. At 1:30, as he was getting dressed in his suit, I locked myself in the bathroom. Not with screaming or threats, just quiet, terrifying silence. Hey, you okay in there? Travis knocked, annoyed. I didn't answer. He knocked harder. I need to leave in 15 minutes. I turned on the water, made some shuffling sounds, then let out one small, broken sob. What are you doing? His voice changed, panic creeping in. Open the door. Now. I stayed silent. He pounded on the door. This isn't funny. I have my Harvard interview. Through the door quietly. Tell Mom and Dad I'm sorry. I just can't do it anymore. Do what anymore? He was screaming now. Open the fucking door! I could hear him trying to pick the lock, calling for our parents who were both at work. Please, he begged. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. Just come out. I'll miss my interview. I don't care. Just please come out. His voice cracked. I'm calling 911, he said. No, I whispered. Please don't. Just go to your interview. It's important. Fuck the interview! He was crying now. Please, I'm sorry for whatever I did. I'm sorry for everything. Just open the door. Please don't hurt yourself. Please. For 10 minutes, he begged. Promised anything. His Yale interview time came and went. Finally, I unlocked the door and stepped out, completely fine. He stared at me, his face a mess of tears and confusion. I needed you to understand, I said calmly. How it feels when someone you love holds their life hostage, when you have to choose between their threats and your own life. He slid down the wall, still in his interview suit, shaking. I really thought you were going to. I know, I said. That's how Mom feels every time. That's how we all feel, every single day. Travis looked up at me, and I saw it click. The exhaustion, the fear, the resentment he'd been creating in everyone who loved him. I missed Yale, he whispered. Yeah, I said. And I missed being your brother instead of your suicide prevention hotline. He just nodded and went to his room. That was 3 days ago. Today I came home from school to silence. I dropped my backpack by the door. Is anyone home? Nothing. I walked upstairs. His bedroom door was open, and his Yale rejection letter was on his desk. Then I heard it. Water running in the bathroom. Travis? I knocked. The door was locked. I looked around and noticed a dark liquid leaking out under the door. It looked like red hair dye. Please. I started pounding against the doorframe. I pound harder, my fist hitting the wood so many times it starts to hurt. The red liquid keeps spreading, creeping across the white tile like it's moving on its own. My phone is in my hand before I even think about it, fingers shaking so bad I almost drop it twice before I get 911 typed in. The dispatcher answers and I'm talking before she finishes her greeting, words coming out fast and broken. I tell her my brother is locked in the bathroom, and there's red liquid coming out from under the door, and I don't know if it's blood or hair dye, but I need help right now. She asks for my address and I give it. Then she asks if I can hear him moving around in there. I press my ear against the door and hear water running and maybe some shuffling sounds, but I can't tell if that's good or bad. She tells me to stay on the line. That help is coming and I can hear her typing something on her end. She starts asking questions about Travis, about his history, and I have to explain that yes, he's threatened to hurt himself before. Yes, multiple times. Yes, our family has been dealing with this for years. Each answer feels like I'm betraying everyone, exposing all the stuff we've kept hidden from neighbors and teachers and everyone else. But I can't stop talking because what if I'm wrong about the hair dye? What if this time is real? What if my stupid lesson 3 days ago pushed him over some edge I didn't know existed? The sirens start far away and get louder fast, and I hear the dispatcher saying the paramedics are almost there. I run downstairs and unlock the front door, then run back up because I don't want to leave Travis alone even with a locked door between us. The paramedics come in with heavy footsteps and equipment that clanks against the stairs. There are 2 of them, both wearing dark blue uniforms, and they ask me which door. I point and step back, but one of them puts a hand on my shoulder and moves me further down the hallway. They have this metal tool thing that they wedge into the door frame, and it takes maybe 30 seconds before the lock breaks and the door swings open. I try to see past them, but they're blocking my view completely, their bodies filling the doorway. One of them says something to the other that I can't hear, then the taller one turns around and walks toward me. His face is calm but serious, and he tells me Travis is conscious and talking. The red stuff is hair dye, not blood, but they're taking him to the hospital anyway because of the circumstances and because I mentioned his history of threats. I feel this weird mix of relief and confusion and anger all at once. Relief because he's alive. Confusion because I don't know if this was another manipulation or something different. Anger because I can't tell anymore where Travis's real problems end and his control tactics begin. They bring him out on a stretcher even though he's walking fine and his face looks completely blank, like he's somewhere else entirely. He doesn't look at me as they carry him past. I follow them downstairs and watch them load him into the ambulance, the lights flashing red and blue across our front yard. A few neighbors are standing on their porches watching, and I know this is going to be all over the neighborhood by tonight. I pull out my phone with hands that won't stop shaking and call Mom first. She answers on the second ring and I just say Travis, an ambulance, and hospital before she starts screaming into the phone. Not words exactly. Just this high, scared sound that makes my chest hurt. I tell her he's alive, he's conscious. They're taking him to County General and she hangs up without saying anything else. Then I call Dad at work and he answers with his customer service voice until I say what happened. He goes quiet for a few seconds, then tells me he's leaving right now and he'll meet me at the hospital. His voice sounds flat and tired, like he expected this call eventually. I text Grace at the school because I don't want her to hear about the ambulance from someone else. I type Travis in the hospital. He's alive. Coming home early and send it before I can think too much about what those words will do to her day. Each call feels like I'm setting off bombs in different parts of our family's life, but somebody has to tell them before the school calls, or the neighbors start talking, or the hospital tries to reach our parents. I grab my backpack and my keys and drive to County General, following the route the ambulance took about 10 minutes ahead of me. At the ER, I walk up to the desk and tell the nurse I'm here for my brother who just came in by ambulance. She asks for his name and my information, then tells me to have a seat in the waiting area while they evaluate him. I sit in one of those plastic chairs that's attached to 3 other plastic chairs, and I stare at the TV in the corner that's playing some talk show with the sound off. The nurse comes over after maybe 20 minutes and sits down next to me with a clipboard. She asks if there have been previous attempts or threats, and I have to walk her through the whole pattern. The knife at Grace's birthday party, the pills in the bathroom over the chemistry test, the constant threats over college and Xbox and parties and everything else. Every word I say feels like I'm accusing myself, like I'm admitting I knew this was coming and did nothing to stop it, or worse, that I made it worse with my bathroom stunt 3 days ago. She writes everything down without judging, just nodding and asking follow-up questions about dates and details. When she's done, she tells me a doctor will come talk to the family once they finish the evaluation, and she goes back to her desk. Mom and Dad show up within 5 minutes of each other, and I can tell Mom drove way too fast to get here because her mascara is streaked down her face and her hands are shaking. Dad still has his work uniform on, the name tag and everything, and he looks around the waiting room like he's trying to figure out where to go. They both see me at the same time and walk over, and before either of them can even sit down, Mom turns on me. She gets right in my face and her voice comes out like a hiss, low but harsh. She says I did this, that my little stunt 3 days ago pushed Travis over the edge, that I'm responsible for whatever happens to him. Dad puts his hand on her shoulder, but he doesn't disagree with her, doesn't tell her she's wrong or being unfair. He just stands there looking at me with this tired, disappointed expression, and I feel the weight of their blame settle on my shoulders like something physical. Part of me wants to argue, wants to explain that Travis has been doing this for years, and I just tried to show him what it felt like, but another part of me thinks maybe they're right. Maybe I did push him too far. Maybe teaching him a lesson by using his own tactics was the worst thing I could have done. I sit back down and they sit on either side of me, and we all just stare at the TV without really seeing it. A doctor in a white coat comes out about 40 minutes later and calls our last name. We all stand up and he introduces himself as Dr. Gould. He tells us Travis is physically fine, no injuries, no signs of self-harm. The red liquid was definitely hair dye, probably from a bottle Grace had in her bathroom from some school project months ago. But they're keeping him for observation, possibly a 72-hour involuntary hold depending on how the evaluation goes. He uses all these terms like safety planning and crisis intervention and psychiatric assessment, and it all feels suddenly real in a way that Travis's threats never did before. Before it was just our family and our secrets, but now there are professionals and protocols and official procedures. Dr. Gould explains that someone from the psychiatric team will evaluate Travis to determine if he's a danger to himself, and based on that evaluation, they'll decide whether he needs inpatient treatment or if he can go home with a safety plan. He asks if we have questions, and Dad asks how long until we know. And Dr. Gould says probably a few hours. Then he goes back through the double doors, and we're left standing in the waiting room again. I sit back down in the plastic chair, and my brain starts replaying my staged bathroom incident from 3 days ago. I see myself practicing in the mirror, timing the water sounds, planning the exact words to say through the door. I calculated every detail to teach Travis a lesson, to make him feel the fear and helplessness he'd been creating in all of us for years. But now I can't stop thinking about the difference between my performance and whatever happened today. Was Travis trying to manipulate us again? Or did something actually break inside him? Did my lesson push him toward a real crisis? Or was he just copying my tactics to get attention after the Yale rejection? The guilt feels like it's crushing my chest, making it hard to breathe. I keep trying to draw a line between where my responsibility ends and Travis's choices begin, but the line keeps moving and blurring until I can't see it anymore. A guy in khakis and a button-up shirt comes over and introduces himself as Sebastian Winters, the hospital social worker. He sits down with us and starts explaining all these requirements and protocols. He talks about mandatory reporting, which means the hospital has to file a report about Travis's incident with some county agency. He describes safety planning, which involves removing all sharp objects from the house, locking up medications, and setting up supervision schedules. He mentions establishing check-ins with a therapist and possibly a psychiatrist for medication management. He's calm and professional the whole time, like he's explained this exact same thing to hundreds of families before us. But I watch Mom shrink with every word he says. Her shoulders curl forward and her face gets smaller, like she's being told that her parenting failed, and now strangers have to step in to fix it. Dad just nods along, asking practical questions about what needs to happen when, but I can see the defeat in his eyes too. My phone buzzes in my pocket, and I pull it out to see a text from Grace. She says she's at her friend's house and she doesn't want to come to the hospital. She's done being part of the Travis show and she needs everyone to understand that. Her anger comes through even in the short message, and I don't blame her at all. I text back that she's safe to stay away, that someone in this family should get to have a normal evening. I add that I'll let her know when we hear anything important, but she doesn't have to come or call or do anything she doesn't want to do. She sends back a thumbs up emoji and nothing else. I put my phone away and look at Mom and Dad still talking with Sebastian about supervision plans and therapy appointments, and I realize that Grace has already figured out what the rest of us are still learning, that you can love someone and still need distance from them. That supporting family doesn't mean sacrificing everything else, that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is say no to the crisis and protect your own peace. Sebastian stands up to give us a moment, and I watch Dad pull out his reading glasses from his shirt pocket. Mom leans close and whispers something about college applications and how a psychiatric hold could affect Travis's future, her voice tight with that specific panic she gets when she thinks about what other people will say about our family. Dad doesn't look at her, just asks Sebastian where he needs to sign, and Sebastian points to 3 different spots on the consent forms spread across the small table in the consultation room. Dad's hand shakes as he writes his signature on the first form, the pen making scratchy sounds against the paper, but his jaw is set in a way I haven't seen in years. He's not arguing or negotiating or looking for an escape route to his car, just signing each form methodically while Mom's protests get quieter and quieter until she's just sitting there with her arms wrapped around herself. The third signature takes longer because Dad pauses and reads the whole paragraph about voluntary psychiatric evaluation and potential involuntary hold if the assessment determines Travis is a danger to himself. He signs it anyway and hands the clipboard back to Sebastian, who nods and says, "Someone will come get us when we can see Travis." Mom pulls out her phone and starts texting someone, probably her sister, and I can see her hands trembling as she types. Dad sits down next to me and we don't talk, just exist in this weird space where we're all processing that we just officially put Travis in the mental health system instead of handling it ourselves like we always have before. 20 minutes later, a nurse with a badge that says Kelly comes to get me explaining that Travis asked to see me first, and they're allowing brief family visits in the observation area. I follow her down a hallway that smells like disinfectant and anxiety, past other rooms with closed doors and the occasional sound of someone crying or talking loudly. She stops at a door with a window and tells me I have 10 minutes, that she'll be visible the whole time through the glass, and that if Travis shows any signs of distress, she'll end the visit immediately. I nod and walk in to find Travis sitting on a narrow bed in the hospital scrubs, his regular clothes folded on a chair in the corner. He looks smaller somehow without his usual carefully chosen outfit. Just a 17-year-old kid in shapeless blue cotton with dark circles under his eyes. Neither of us knows how to start this conversation, so we just look at each other for a few seconds while the fluorescent lights buzz overhead. He breaks first, his voice flat and exhausted when he finally speaks, asking if I'm happy now that I proved my point. The words hang between us like an accusation and an admission at the same time, and I want to argue that this wasn't about winning or being right, but the response dies in my throat, because I don't actually know what I proved. I proved that our family is broken, that manipulation breeds more manipulation, that I'm just as capable of weaponizing fear as he is, that none of us know how to be honest without being cruel. I sit down in the plastic chair against the wall and tell him I'm not happy, that I never wanted this, and he laughs this bitter sound that doesn't match his exhausted face. He says I wanted him to understand what it felt like, and now he does. So mission accomplished. Except now he's in a hospital observation room and I'm the one who gets to go home. I try to explain that the hair dye incident wasn't the same as my staged bathroom performance, that there's a difference between teaching a lesson and having an actual crisis, but even as I say it, I realize how hollow it sounds. Maybe there isn't a difference when you're the person on the other side of the locked door, when you're the one choosing between believing the threat is real or risking being wrong. Travis pulls his knees up to his chest and wraps his arms around them, looking younger than he has in years, and asks what happens now. I tell him honestly that I don't know, that there are safety plans and therapy and protocols, that our family is trying to figure out how to not destroy each other. He nods slowly, and the nurse taps on the window, signaling that my time is up. I stand and move toward the door, turning back to see Travis still curled up on the bed, and I leave without saying goodbye, because nothing I could say would make this moment less terrible for either of us. Sebastian is waiting in the hallway with a manila folder when I come out, and he walks me back to where Mom and Dad are sitting. He opens the folder and pulls out several stapled pages, explaining that this is a draft safety plan that will need to be finalized with Travis's treatment team, but gives us a starting framework. He goes through it point by point in this calm, professional voice that makes our family dysfunction sound like a medical condition with treatment protocols. The plan lists who checks in with Travis daily, which is Dad in the morning before work and Mom in the evening before bed. It specifies that all medications, including over-the-counter pain relievers, will be stored in a locked cabinet in Mom and Dad's bathroom, with only Dad having the key. It details that sharp objects, including kitchen knives, scissors, and razors, will be secured in a locked drawer, with Travis asking for supervised access when needed. It outlines specific phrases Travis should use when he's struggling, like asking for a check-in or saying he needs to use his coping skills, instead of making threats or vague statements. It lists triggers for immediate crisis calls, including any statement about self-harm, any concerning social media posts, any attempt to access restricted items, or any significant mood changes that last more than a few hours. Sebastian explains that someone from the crisis team will do wellness checks twice a week for the first month, and that Travis will have individual therapy 3 times a week, plus our family sessions. The clinical language makes everything feel both more manageable and more depressing, like we're acknowledging that our family can't function without external structure and professional oversight. Mom asks how long these restrictions stay in place, and Sebastian says it depends on Travis's progress and the treatment team's assessment, but to expect at least several months of intensive monitoring. Dad asks about school, and Sebastian says Travis will need accommodations, and the guidance office will be notified, which makes Mom flinch again at the thought of more people knowing our private family business. I watch them process all these rules and check-ins and restrictions, seeing our house transform in my mind from a home into something between a hospital and a halfway house, and I'm not sure if that feels like safety or surrender. That night, we go home without Travis for the first time since this whole thing started, and the house feels wrong in ways I can't quite name. Mom goes straight to their bedroom and closes the door, and I hear her on the phone probably talking to her sister or her friend Karen, who she tells everything to. Dad microwaves leftovers, and we eat standing at the kitchen counter in silence, neither of us knowing what to say now that the immediate crisis has passed, but the bigger crisis is just beginning. After dinner, I go upstairs and pass Travis's open bedroom door, seeing his Yale rejection letter still on his desk next to his laptop and a half-empty water bottle. I close his door and go to my own room, lying down on my bed for the first time in days without that constant tension of listening for sounds from Travis's room. The peace feels guilty, like I'm relieved my brother is locked in a hospital observation room instead of terrorizing our family, and I hate myself a little bit for being grateful he's not here. I sleep better than I have in weeks, solid and dreamless, And when I wake up the next morning, the guilt hits harder because my first thought is, thank God he's still in the hospital. I get ready for school in the quiet house. Mom already gone to work and Dad making coffee in the kitchen, and everything feels both lighter and heavier at the same time. At the school, I make it through first and second period before I get called down to the guidance office over the intercom. I walk through the hallways knowing everyone heard my name and wondering if they know why I'm being called, if the rumors about the ambulance at my house have spread enough that people are connecting the dots. Callie Lambert is waiting in her office, the door open and a box of tissues on her desk like she's expecting tears. She's younger than most of the other counselors, maybe late 20s, and she has this way of being direct without being harsh that makes it hard to lie to her. She asks me to close the door and sit down, then explains that the hospital reported Travis's incident as required by law and that she wanted to check in with me. Her voice is gentle, but her questions are specific, asking how I'm doing, what support I have, whether I feel safe at home. I tell her I'm fine, and our family is handling it, the automatic response I've perfected over years of hiding our dysfunction. She lets the silence stretch until I can't stand it anymore, and I admit that it's complicated, that I don't know if I'm okay or not. She nods like she expected that answer, and then she says something that makes my stomach drop, explaining that she knows about my staged bathroom incident because Travis mentioned it during his evaluation. She's not angry or judgmental when she tells me that what I did, even with good intentions, was harmful, and that I need to separate accountability for Travis's choices from blame for his mental health crisis. I want to defend myself, to explain that I was trying to teach him a lesson, but she cuts through my excuses by asking if I would tell someone else that emotional manipulation is okay, as long as you're trying to prove a point. The question sits heavy between us and I can't answer it because we both know the answer is no. She gives me some pamphlets about family crisis support and healthy boundaries, tells me her door is always open and sends me back to class with the kind of look that says she's going to be checking in whether I want her to or not. I spend lunch period in the library instead of the cafeteria, pulling out my notebook and trying to write an impact letter to Travis like Callie suggested. The first draft comes out angry and defensive, listing all the ways his manipulation has destroyed our family and explaining why I did what I did. I read it back and realize it sounds like I'm still trying to win an argument instead of taking responsibility, so I tear it out and start again. The second draft is too apologetic, full of sorry, and I didn't mean to, and please forgive me, and it makes me sound like I'm begging for absolution instead of actually acknowledging harm. I crumple that one too and start a third time, trying to find words that are honest without being cruel, that take accountability without making excuses. I write about being scared for years, about watching Grace's birthday get destroyed, about Dad sleeping in his car and Mom's panic attacks, about feeling helpless and angry and desperate to make Travis understand. I write about my staged bathroom incident and how I planned every detail to teach him a lesson and how I'm sorry that my manipulation became part of his breakdown, even though I can't separate my actions from his choices. The third draft feels more honest, but I still don't know if it helps him or just makes me feel better about my guilt. So I fold it up and put it in my backpack without any plan to actually deliver it. The bell rings for fourth period, and I shove the notebook in my locker, wondering if there's any way to apologize for weaponizing the same fear you're trying to stop without sounding like a hypocrite. Mom calls during my free period, her voice small and defeated in a way that makes my chest tight. She says she scheduled a family therapy intake appointment for this weekend with someone named Marshall Bell, who specializes in crisis intervention and family systems. She sounds like she's admitting failure, like scheduling therapy means accepting that we can't fix this ourselves the way we've always tried to. I tell her that's probably a good thing, even though it feels like giving up, and she makes this small sound that might be agreement or might be crying. She asks if I'll come to the appointment, and I say yes because what else am I going to say? That I'm tired of being part of the family crisis management team, that I want my own life separate from Travis's breakdown. She thanks me and hangs up quickly like she can't handle talking anymore, and I sit in the empty classroom staring at my phone. And thinking about how we're all finally admitting we need help, but it took Travis in a hospital observation room to get us there. That evening after dinner, Dad asks if we can talk and we end up sitting at the kitchen table with the safety plan Sebastian gave us spread between us. Dad looks older than he did even a week ago, new lines around his eyes and gray in his stubble that I don't remember seeing before. He tells me something I never expected to hear, admitting that sleeping in the car wasn't just about escaping Travis's threats, but about his own fear that he'd snap and say something unforgivable. His vulnerability surprises me because he's usually the silent one, the parent who disappears rather than engages, and I realize we've all been performing our roles in this family drama without admitting how scared we actually are. He explains that his own father used threats and anger to control their family when Dad was growing up, and that he's terrified of becoming that person, of letting his frustration turn into the kind of rage that breaks people. So instead of risking that, he just left, slept in his car, avoided the situation entirely, which he knows now was its own kind of abandonment. I don't know what to say to this confession, so I just nod and tell him I get it, that we've all been doing the best we can with broken tools. He asks if I'm okay, And I give him the honest answer, which is, I don't know, that I feel guilty and angry and relieved and scared all at the same time. We sit there for a while, not saying much, just two people who love each other trying to figure out how to be a family again instead of hostages in the same house. My phone buzzes with a text to the family group chat, and I pull it out to see Travis's message lighting up the screen. He says he's sorry for worrying everyone, but he didn't think anyone would actually care that much, and I can feel him testing the waters even through the text message. He's probing for the old patterns, seeing if we'll rush to reassure him that of course we care, that we'll do anything to keep him safe, that his feelings are more important than everyone else's reality. I watch the 3 dots appear as Mom starts typing a response, and I know she's about to tell him how much she loves him, and how scared she was, and how nothing matters except him being okay. It's the same script we've followed for years, the immediate emotional response that tells Travis his manipulation works, that threatening self-harm gets him the attention and reassurance he wants. I type out my response before Mom can send hers, keeping it simple and boundaried the way Sebastian said we should. I tell Travis I'm glad he's getting help, and we'll talk more when he comes home. Nothing about how scared I was or how much I care or any of the emotional hooks he's fishing for. I hit send and watch Mom's typing indicator stop, see her look at her phone and then reach for it to call Travis privately like she always does. Dad's hand moves faster than I expect, gently taking her phone and reminding her that the social worker said to keep communication consistent and not get pulled into individual reassurance cycles. Mom looks at him with this expression of hurt and confusion, like he's being cruel by stopping her from comforting her son. But Dad holds firm and reminds her that responding to tests and manipulation is what got us here in the first place. She pulls her hand back slowly, and I watch her wrestle with the urge to fix and comfort and make everything okay. The same urge that's enabled Travis's threats for years. The family group chat stays quiet after my message. No flood of I love yous or reassurances, just my boundaried response sitting there like a new rule we're all learning to follow. My phone buzzes again and I pull it out expecting another family group message, but it's a separate text from Penelope Grace. She says she's not visiting Travis in the hospital and doesn't want anyone to make her feel bad about it, that she needs space from the constant Travis emergency mode. I read it twice and feel relieved that at least one person in this family is setting boundaries instead of rushing to fix everything. I text back that it's completely fair, and she doesn't owe anyone forgiveness or support right now, that taking care of herself matters more than performing family unity. She sends back a heart emoji and the words "thank you for getting it," and I save the message because it feels like proof that someone understands we can't keep sacrificing ourselves on the altar of Travis's crises. Mom glances at my phone and asks if that was Grace, and I tell her yes, that Grace is staying with her friend tonight and needs some space. Mom's face crumples and she reaches for her phone to call Grace directly, but Dad intercepts her hand again and reminds her that pushing Grace right now will only make things worse. The next morning, we get a call from the hospital saying there's a family meeting with Travis's treatment team at 2 o'clock and everyone needs to be there. Mom spends the entire morning cleaning the house like the therapists are going to inspect our home, scrubbing counters and folding laundry with jerky movements that show how close she is to breaking. Dad takes a half day off work and picks me up from the school early, both of us silent in the car as we drive to the hospital. We meet Sebastian in the hallway outside the conference room, and he explains that the treatment team wants to go over Travis's discharge plan and safety protocols before he comes home. Mom nods along, but I can see her hands shaking as she grips her purse. The meeting starts with introductions, and the psychiatrist explains Travis's diagnosis and medication plan using terms like adjustment disorder and safety contract that make everything sound clinical and manageable. Mom sits perfectly still listening to every word until the social worker starts talking about the history of threats and manipulation patterns in our family. That's when she breaks. Her breathing gets fast and shallow, and she starts crying that she failed as a mother and should have seen this coming, that she enabled Travis's behavior because she was too scared to set boundaries. The nurse quickly helps her sit down and brings a paper bag for her to breathe into while Dad and I watch helplessly from across the table. I realize Mom's been holding herself together with willpower and denial that's finally cracking under the weight of professional scrutiny. The psychiatrist pauses the meeting and gives Mom time to recover, while Dad rubs her back and murmurs reassurances that sound hollow even to me. When Mom can breathe normally again, the social worker gently explains that acknowledging the patterns is the first step toward changing them, that our family isn't broken beyond repair, but we need structure and consistency going forward. We leave the hospital with a folder full of paperwork and phone numbers and a follow-up appointment scheduled with a family therapist named Marshall Bell. 3 days later, we're sitting in Marshall's office for our first session, the waiting room decorated with neutral colors and magazines nobody reads. Marshall is a middle-aged guy with glasses and a direct way of speaking that makes it clear he's not here to coddle us. He starts the session by laying out ground rules, and his voice is matter-of-fact rather than sympathetic. No threats of self-harm will be negotiated with. Any threat triggers the safety protocol, including a possible 911 call, and consequences for manipulation are clear and consistent. He treats our dysfunction like a problem to solve rather than a tragedy to mourn, which somehow makes it feel more manageable than all the crying and panic we've been doing at home. Marshall asks each of us to agree verbally to the ground rules, and we go around the room saying yes, even though Mom's voice shakes when it's her turn. He explains that Travis will join our sessions once he's discharged, but for now we need to establish the family system that he'll be coming home to. Dad asks what happens if Travis refuses to follow the rules, and Marshall says calmly that natural consequences happen, that we can't control Travis's choices, but we can control our responses. The session ends with homework assignments for each of us, and a reminder that change takes time and consistency. 2 days after that, Officer Shannon shows up at our house for a police follow-up. She's professional but warm, as she explains that Travis's incident is now documented in the system, and future wellness checks will reference this history. She walks through our house taking notes on the safety plan, checking that sharp objects are secured and medications are locked up. Mom flinches every time Officer Shannon mentions police involvement or documentation, like having cops in our living room makes our family's problems officially real in a way the hospital visits didn't. Officer Shannon sits down at our kitchen table and explains how the system works when someone makes repeated threats. That if Travis calls 911 or makes statements about self-harm online, the police will respond and evaluate the situation. She's not trying to scare us, but she's clear that manipulative behavior has consequences beyond our family, that the system takes these things seriously. Dad asks good questions about what triggers a wellness check and what our rights are as parents, and I can see him building a mental framework for how to handle future incidents. Officer Shannon leaves her card on our counter and tells us to call if we need anything, then drives away in her patrol car while our neighbors definitely notice. That afternoon, I have my individual session with Callie Lambert at the school. I've been dreading this because I know I need to confess what I did, but saying it out loud feels like admitting I'm just as manipulative as Travis. Callie asks how I'm doing with everything, and I start with the easy stuff, talking about the hospital and the family therapy, and how scared I was when I saw the red liquid under the door. Then I take a breath and tell her the full details of my staged bathroom incident. I explain how I practiced in the mirror and timed it to ruin Travis's interview, how I calculated every detail to teach him a lesson about manipulation. Callie listens without interrupting, and when I finish, she doesn't sugarcoat her response. She explains that I modeled exactly the manipulation I was trying to stop, that I used the same tactics Travis uses and hurt him the same way he's been hurting us. She says I need to make amends not just to Travis but to myself for compromising my own values, that being right about Travis's manipulation doesn't make my actions okay. The words hit hard because part of me still wants to be the hero who exposed Travis, but Callie's making it clear I'm not. She assigns me to write an amends plan that addresses what I did wrong, how it harmed others, and what I'll do differently going forward. She explains that amends isn't about being forgiven, but about taking responsibility, that I need to own my choices regardless of whether Travis or anyone else accepts my apology. The homework feels heavy, but also clarifying, like I'm finally being held accountable instead of being treated as either the hero who exposed Travis or the villain who broke him. I leave her office with the assignment sheet and a weird mix of relief and shame. Travis comes home 4 days later under the full safety plan. Dad installed a lock on the medicine cabinet, and only he has the key. We went through Travis's room and removed anything sharp, even his scissors and razor. His therapist visits twice a week, and we have family sessions every Saturday. The house feels different with these structures in place, less like a prison and more like a hospital ward, which is depressing but also safer than the chaos we lived in before. Travis barely talks when he walks through the door, just goes to his room and closes the door without slamming it. That evening, we have our first family dinner with Travis home. Mom made pasta because it's easy and nobody has strong feelings about it. We sit down at the table and the silence is awkward and heavy, everyone hyper-aware of the new rules and afraid to say anything that might trigger a crisis. I pass the salad bowl and Travis takes some without looking at me. Dad asks about everyone's day using his careful voice, and we give brief answers that don't mention Yale or college or the bathroom incident. The heavy quiet feels both peaceful and suffocating, like we're all holding our breath waiting for something to explode. We finish eating and start clearing plates when Travis makes a comment about his homework. He says he doesn't see the point of the assignment his teacher gave him, and the words hang in the air for a second. Mom immediately reaches for her phone to call Marshall per the safety protocol we agreed to. Travis backpedals quickly and says he just meant the assignment was boring, that he wasn't making a threat. I watch him realize that the old patterns won't work anymore when we follow the system, instead of our fear. Mom puts her phone down but keeps it in her hand and asks Travis to clarify what he meant. He explains the actual homework and why it seems pointless, and his voice is normal, not loaded with hidden meaning. Dad listens and then enforces the consequence we agreed to in therapy. He tells Travis calmly that veiled threats mean he loses phone privileges for 24 hours and has increased check-ins, that even though Travis clarified his meaning, the comment crossed a line. To everyone's surprise, Travis accepts it without escalation. He hands over his phone and nods and goes back to his room. The boundary holds and I see something shift in Dad's posture, like he's remembering how to be a parent instead of a hostage negotiator. Our next family session happened on Saturday morning, all of us sitting in Marshall's office with the same uncomfortable chairs and the same box of tissues on the side table. Marshall started by asking if anyone had thoughts about the week, and for a long minute nobody said anything. Then Penelope Grace shifted in her seat and cleared her throat, her hands gripping the armrests so tight her knuckles went white. She looked at Marshall instead of at any of us and started talking about her birthday, how she'd planned it for months and picked out specific decorations and invited friends she really wanted to celebrate with. Her voice shook, but she kept going, describing how Travis stood up with the knife and how her friends' faces changed from happy to scared in seconds. She said she felt invisible in our family, like the only time anyone noticed her was when she was helping with a Travis crisis or staying quiet so she wouldn't add stress. She told Marshall she wanted her life back, that she was tired of being the good kid who never caused problems because there was always a Travis emergency taking up all the oxygen in the house. Marshall nodded and validated everything she said, asking her to say more about what she needed, and Travis stared at the floor the whole time with his jaw clenched. When Penelope Grace finished talking, the silence felt heavy and awful, and I realized I'd never actually heard her say any of this out loud before, even though we all knew it. Marshall thanked her for her honesty and asked Travis if he wanted to respond, but Travis just shook his head and kept looking down. The session ended with Marshall giving us homework about identifying our individual needs versus family needs, and we walked out to the parking lot without talking. I caught up with Penelope Grace before she got in the car and asked if we could talk for a minute. She stopped and turned around, her arms crossed over her chest like she was protecting herself. I told her I was sorry that my staged bathroom incident added another layer of Travis drama to her already destroyed birthday, that I'd been so focused on teaching Travis a lesson that I didn't think about how it would affect her. I said I knew I'd made things worse by fighting his manipulation with more manipulation, and that I was genuinely sorry. She looked at me for a second, and then stepped forward and hugged me, which I wasn't expecting. When she pulled back, she said she knew I was trying to help, and she understood why I did it, but that our whole family needed to stop using Travis's tactics against each other and actually deal with the real problems. She said it with this clear, direct voice that made her sound way older than 13, and I felt both proud of her for being so smart about it and ashamed that a middle schooler had better boundaries than I did. We got in the car and Mom asked if everything was okay, and Penelope Grace just said yes and put in her earbuds for the drive home. Monday at the school felt like walking through a minefield of whispers and stares. The ambulance at our house had been visible enough that neighbors noticed, and apparently someone's older sibling knew someone in my grade, so by lunch the rumors were spreading. People asked if my brother was okay, if it was drugs, if someone died, and I kept my head down and said I didn't want to talk about it. Some kids respected that and backed off immediately. Others kept pushing with questions disguised as concern, wanting details they could turn into gossip. I ate lunch in the library and avoided the cafeteria entirely. My friend Jason texted me asking if I needed anything and said he was around if I wanted to talk but wouldn't push, which made me grateful for friends who understood boundaries. Walking through the halls felt like wearing my family's dysfunction as a visible scar that everyone could see and point at. I got through the day by focusing on homework and assignments, letting schoolwork be the one normal thing I could control. By the time the final bell rang, I was exhausted from holding everything together and just wanted to go home and hide in my room. That week, Dad started coming home for dinner every night instead of working late or sleeping in his car. The first night he showed up at 6, I actually checked the calendar to see if I'd forgotten about some special occasion. He helped Mom set the table and asked about everyone's homework, like it was the most normal thing in the world. After we ate, he stayed and helped with dishes, standing at the sink next to Mom while they talked about boring parent stuff like grocery lists and bills. It felt revolutionary after years of him ghosting his own family to avoid Travis's threats and tantrums. He kept it up all week, showing up for dinner and asking questions and being present even when it was uncomfortable. One night, Travis made a comment about how Dad must have gotten tired of his car seat, and Dad just said calmly that he was choosing to be home because that's where he needed to be. The small change shifted something in the house, like we were all realizing that showing up consistently mattered more than grand gestures or dramatic apologies. The official Yale rejection letter came in the mail on a Thursday, the envelope thin and obviously bad news before anyone even opened it. Travis got home from the school and saw it on the kitchen table where Mom had left it. All of us coincidentally in the kitchen when he picked it up. He opened it slowly and read the letter, his face going through grief and rage in the span of seconds. We could see him trying to contain it, his jaw working and his hands shaking as he crumpled the letter into a ball. He stood there for a minute like he might say something or throw something, and then he just turned and walked upstairs to his room. Mom started to follow him, but Dad put a hand on her arm and shook his head. We let him have space to feel his feelings without rushing to fix them or minimize the disappointment. Marshall had told us this was important, letting Travis learn to sit with hard emotions without turning them into weapons or demands for rescue. It felt wrong to just stand there and not do anything, but we stayed in the kitchen and gave him the room to be upset on his own. I found Travis crying in his room about an hour later, sitting on his bed with his face in his hands. I knocked on the open door and he looked up, his eyes red and his face wet. Every instinct I had wanted to apologize again or try to fix how he felt, but I made myself just sit down on the floor near his bed instead. We sat there for a few minutes in silence, him crying quietly, and me just being present without trying to make it better. Finally, I said his therapist's number was on his phone if he wanted to do an emergency check-in, and he nodded and pulled out his phone. I left while he was dialing and closed his door behind me. Later, I heard him talking on the phone, his voice low and unsteady, but actually talking instead of threatening or manipulating. When he came out for dinner, he looked exhausted but calmer, and nobody asked him about the call or the letter. It felt like a tiny step toward him building real coping skills instead of control tactics. The following week, Travis skipped his individual therapy session and claimed he forgot when Dad asked about it. Dad looked at Mom, and then back at Travis, and said that missing therapy meant losing gaming privileges for 3 days, per the consequences we all agreed to. Travis's face went red, and he started arguing that he genuinely forgot, and it wasn't fair to punish him for an honest mistake. Dad stayed calm and said the consequence wasn't about punishment, but about accountability, and that if Travis wanted to change the system, we could discuss it in family therapy. But for now, the rule stood. Travis stomped off to his room and slammed the door, and I waited for Dad to cave or for Mom to interfere, but neither of them moved. Dad went upstairs an hour later and collected Travis's gaming console and controllers without discussion. Travis was furious and sullen for the next 3 days, barely speaking at meals and radiating resentment. But the consequence held, and I watched our parents actually follow through even though it would have been easier to let it slide and avoid the conflict. Mom announced at dinner one night that she'd started her own individual therapy, and her doctor had prescribed medication for her panic attacks. She said it quietly, like she was ashamed, and explained that she'd been struggling for years and needed help managing her anxiety. Dad reached over and squeezed her hand, and Penelope Grace said she was proud of Mom for taking care of herself. Mom's eyes filled with tears, and she said she should have done it sooner, that she'd let her fear control too much of how she parented. Her honesty gave the rest of us permission to admit we were all dealing with our own stuff from the years of emotional hostage situations. I said I'd been having trouble sleeping and kept replaying the bathroom incident in my head. Penelope Grace said she had nightmares about Travis's knife at her birthday party. Dad admitted he still felt the urge to leave when things got tense. We sat there acknowledging our shared hurt, and it felt both horrible and relieving to say it all out loud. Travis had a genuine panic attack one evening over a college essay draft, his breathing getting fast and ragged while he stared at his laptop. His hands started shaking, and he made this small gasping sound, and instead of threatening to hurt himself, he called out for Dad. Dad came into the living room and saw what was happening and sat down next to Travis on the couch. He asked Travis to breathe with him, and they did the exercises from therapy together, Dad counting slowly while Travis tried to match his breathing. Mom got the safety plan from the fridge, and we all followed the steps calmly, checking if Travis needed his emergency contact, or if this was something we could manage at home. The panic attack passed after about 15 minutes without any threats or manipulation, just a scared kid learning to ask for help without weaponizing his fear. Travis apologized afterward for freaking out, and Dad said there was nothing to apologize for, that asking for support was exactly what he should do. We all went back to what we were doing, and the crisis felt manageable instead of catastrophic. In our next family therapy session, Marshall asked Travis what was underneath all the threats and manipulation, what he was really afraid of. Travis was quiet for a long time, and then said he was scared of being ordinary, of not being special or successful or standing out in any way. He said threatening to hurt himself made him feel like he had control when everything else in his life felt messy and unpredictable. He described how college applications and grades and expectations all pressed down on him until he couldn't breathe, and the threats became a way to make the pressure stop. Marshall listened and then helped him identify the fear as separate from the behavior, explaining that feeling scared of failure was normal, but using self-harm threats to cope with that fear was the problem. I watched Travis talk about his terror of being average and saw him as vulnerable instead of calculating for the first time in years. He looked small and tired sitting in the therapy chair, and I realized he'd been just as trapped by his manipulation as the rest of us were. Marshall gave him homework about identifying other ways to feel in control that didn't involve hurting himself or scaring his family, and Travis actually wrote it down instead of dismissing it. Dad cleared his throat and looked at Marshall, then down at his hands. He started talking about his own father, how Grandpa used to lock himself in the garage with the car running whenever he didn't get his way, how Dad grew up checking on his father multiple times a day to make sure he was still alive. He described finding his father passed out drunk with pill bottles nearby at age 12, being told it was his fault for not being a good enough son. Dad's voice got quiet as he explained he'd spent his whole adult life terrified of becoming his father, while also having no idea how to parent differently because threats and fear were the only language he knew. Mom reached over and took Dad's hand, and I saw her crying silently. Marshall listened without interrupting, then reframed it as a pattern that got passed down but could be broken, saying we were choosing to end the cycle right now in this room instead of passing it to another generation. He said Dad's awareness of the pattern was actually the tool we needed to stop it, that knowing the history meant we could write a different future. Travis looked at Dad with something like understanding, maybe realizing for the first time that our family's dysfunction went deeper than just his manipulation. Marshall pulled out a stack of papers and explained the homework for this week. He wanted us to create what he called a no-threat contract, a written agreement where everyone in the family signed off on how we'd handle Travis's mental health without enabling manipulation. He laid out what needed to be in it, specific phrases we'd use when Travis made threats, clear consequences for using self-harm as leverage, and supports for genuine crises that didn't involve giving in to demands. He said we needed to include check-in schedules, who Travis could call during a real crisis, and what counted as breaking the contract. Mom asked if this was really necessary, if writing it down felt too formal and cold. Marshall said that was exactly why it needed to be written, because our good intentions kept crumbling under pressure, and we needed something concrete to reference when emotions ran high. He handed us templates and examples from other families, explaining we'd spend our next session reviewing what we came up with. The homework felt both clinical and hopeful, like we were building a new family language that didn't include emotional terrorism as a valid form of communication. That evening, we spread the contract templates across the kitchen table after dinner. Mom wanted to start with the support section. Dad wanted to tackle consequences first, and Travis kept saying the whole thing felt like we were treating him like a criminal. I suggested we go in order through Marshall's outline, and we started with defining what counted as a threat versus what counted as asking for help. We argued for 20 minutes about whether saying you're tired of everything qualified as a threat. Grace said it depended on context and tone, which led to more arguing about how we'd know the difference. Dad proposed we treat any ambiguous statement as a potential threat until proven otherwise, which Travis hated, but eventually agreed made sense given his history. We moved to consequences and spent another half-hour debating what should happen if Travis broke the contract. Mom wanted consequences that felt supportive. Dad wanted them to be clear deterrents, and Travis just wanted them to be fair. We settled on an escalating system where first violations meant increased check-ins and supervision, repeated violations meant loss of privileges, and serious violations meant immediate activation of the safety protocol, including possible hospitalization. Travis signed off on each consequence as we wrote it down, which felt important. We added support systems next, listing Marshall's number, the crisis hotline, Travis's individual therapist, and specific friends or family Travis could reach out to during genuine struggles. By the time we finished drafting, it was past 10 and we were all exhausted, but we had a document that felt real and enforceable rather than just good intentions that would dissolve the next time Travis tested us. The next morning at breakfast, Grace asked quietly if we could maybe do a small redo of her birthday. She said she didn't want anything big, just family and maybe 2 friends, pizza and a cake, something that was actually about her instead of another Travis show. Mom's eyes filled with tears immediately, and she started apologizing for how the first party went, but Grace stopped her and said she just wanted to move forward, not rehash the past. Mom pulled out her phone and started looking at dates, asking Grace what kind of pizza she wanted and what flavor cake. I watched Grace negotiate for what she wanted without apologizing for needing attention, asking for Saturday afternoon, and requesting that Travis only stay for the first hour so she could have space with her friends after. Travis nodded and said that was fair, that he owed her a birthday that wasn't about him. Dad suggested we go to the pizza place Grace liked instead of ordering in, make it feel more special. Grace smiled, a real smile, and said that sounded perfect. The planning felt like growth for all of us, like we were learning to make space for Grace's needs without either ignoring Travis's mental health or letting it consume everything. Saturday came and we drove to the pizza place at 2 in the afternoon. Grace invited 2 friends from the school, both girls who'd been at the original disaster party, and were clearly nervous about round 2. We ordered 3 pizzas and breadsticks and sat at a big table in the back. Travis participated in the conversation for the first hour, asking Grace's friends about school and their hobbies, being genuinely pleasant instead of making everything about himself. When the hour was up, he looked at Dad and said he was ready to head out, giving them space like he'd promised. Dad drove Travis home while Mom and I stayed with Grace and her friends. We ordered the cake, a small chocolate one with purple frosting that Grace had picked out earlier in the week. When they brought it to the table with candles lit, Grace's face just glowed. Her friends sang happy birthday, and Grace blew out the candles with a genuine smile, making a wish with her eyes closed tight. It went smoothly, no drama or crises, just a normal teenage birthday celebration. Watching Grace laugh with her friends over cake felt like a small victory against years of ruined moments, proof that our family could have normal experiences if we all committed to making space for them. A few days later, Travis came downstairs looking upset, holding his phone. He showed Dad a text from someone at the school, a screenshot of a meme mocking him with an ambulance emoji and the caption about being dramatic. Dad read it and asked Travis how he was feeling about it. Travis said it hurt and made him angry, that he wanted to text back something mean or post about how everyone at the school was fake. Dad sat down with him and they talked through the hurt and anger for about 15 minutes. Dad asking questions about what specifically bothered Travis and validating that having your crisis become school gossip was genuinely painful. Travis didn't spiral or threaten self-harm, just sat there processing his feelings with Dad's support. Later that evening, I was walking past Travis's room and heard him on the phone with his therapist, talking through the text and how it triggered his fear of being seen as manipulative or attention-seeking. He sounded strained, but he was handling it, riding out the feelings without weaponizing them. I kept walking, giving him privacy, but feeling like this was real progress even though I could hear how hard it was for him. In our next therapy session, Marshall brought up Travis's handling of the cruel text and praised it as exactly the kind of response we wanted to see. I felt the urge to pile on, to say something about how Travis was finally learning what the rest of us had been dealing with, but I bit it back. Marshall looked at me and asked what I was thinking, and I admitted I'd wanted to gloat but chose not to. He called it mature restraint and said I was learning an important lesson about being Travis's brother instead of his therapist or his adversary. I was learning that supporting Travis didn't mean fixing his problems or controlling his responses, just being present when he struggled and giving him space when he needed it. Mom asked how she could practice the same restraint because her instinct was still to jump in and solve everything. Marshall suggested she start by counting to 10 before responding to any of Travis's distress, giving herself time to choose a response instead of reacting from panic. The session felt like we were all learning new roles, figuring out how to relate to each other without the old patterns of manipulation and enabling. Late one night, I was in my room doing homework when my phone buzzed with a notification. Travis had posted something on social media, just a vague statement saying he was tired of pretending and didn't know how much longer he could keep up the act. I screenshot it and was about to go talk to him when I heard a knock at the front door. Dad went downstairs and I heard Officer Shannon's voice asking to do a wellness check per the protocol. I came downstairs to find Travis in the living room looking confused and angry, asking why the police were at our house. Officer Shannon explained calmly that his social media post had been flagged by the monitoring system we'd set up, that ambiguous statements about being tired or unable to continue got treated as potential threats until proven otherwise. Travis was embarrassed and furious, saying he was just venting about school stress, that he wasn't threatening anything. Shannon nodded and said she understood, but the system worked this way specifically because we couldn't read minds or know intent from vague posts. She asked Travis directly if he was safe and if he had any plans to hurt himself, and he said no, he was just stressed about college applications. Officer Shannon sat down at our kitchen table and walked through what happens with repeated false alarms or posts that trigger wellness checks. She explained that misusing emergency resources, even unintentionally through vague posting, could result in legal consequences if it became a pattern. She said the system took these situations seriously because they had to respond to every potential threat as if it were real, and that meant police time, crisis resources, and emergency protocols being activated. Travis looked genuinely shaken, like he'd never considered that his words had consequences beyond our family. Shannon wasn't harsh about it, just matter of fact in explaining that social media posts about being tired of life or unable to continue triggered mandatory responses, and that Travis needed to be more careful about how he expressed normal stress online. She said if he needed to vent, he should text his therapist or call the crisis line, not post cryptically where concerned people would report it. I watched Travis realize that manipulation didn't just hurt us, but could actually get him in legal trouble, that the system had teeth beyond family consequences. After Officer Shannon left, Dad pulled out the contract we'd drafted and pointed to the section about social media and vague statements. He explained calmly that this incident counted as a contract violation, that the consequence we'd all agreed on was loss of social media access for 24 hours and increased supervision. Travis started to argue, then stopped himself and asked if this was really necessary. Dad said yes, that we'd all signed the contract, including Travis, and that following through on consequences was how we rebuilt trust and established new patterns. Mom handed over Travis's phone, and Dad changed the passwords on all his social media accounts, explaining he'd restore access tomorrow evening. Travis accepted it with sullen resentment, but without escalation, no threats or manipulation, just visible frustration that he swallowed instead of weaponizing. Dad stayed calm and consistent, not apologizing or softening the boundary, just implementing what we'd agreed to. The consequence held even though it was uncomfortable for everyone, and I felt something shift in our house, like we were actually capable of following through instead of just talking about change. 2 days later, I'm sitting in the school parking lot watching everyone head into the winter dance through my windshield, my phone buzzing with texts from friends asking where I am. I text back that something came up with family, and watch the little dots appear as they respond with understanding emojis and sad faces. It's my turn for Travis supervision duty tonight because Mom has her therapy session and Dad's working late, which means I'm stuck at home making sure Travis doesn't spiral over another college rejection letter that came today. Marshall said during our last session that it's healthy to acknowledge the cost of supporting someone in crisis, that pretending sacrifice doesn't hurt, just builds resentment that explodes later. So I let myself feel angry about missing the dance, about losing another night of normal teenage life to Travis's needs, and I don't try to talk myself out of it or make it noble. I drive home and find Travis on the couch scrolling through his phone with the bitter look he gets when he's trying not to show he's upset. We sit in silence for a while before I realize this is the moment to have the conversation I've been avoiding since the hospital. I put my phone down and turn to face him. I tell him exactly what I did the day of his Yale interview, how I researched the timing and practiced my performance, and calculated every detail to scare him the way he'd been scaring us for years. I explained that I was wrong regardless of my intentions, that using his own tactics against him just added more manipulation to an already toxic situation. I apologize without making excuses or waiting for him to say it's okay, just taking clean responsibility for my choices. Travis listens without interrupting, his face going through stages of anger and hurt and something that might be respect. When I finish, he nods slowly, and we sit there for a minute before he asks what making amends actually looks like, if saying sorry is enough, or if there's more to it. I tell him that's between him and the people he hurt, that I can't give him a checklist or make it easier. I mention that maybe starting with Grace would matter since she spent years having her life derailed by his crises, that her destroyed birthday was just the most visible example of a pattern that's been going on since she was little. He nods again, and I can see him processing that amends isn't a one-time apology that fixes everything, that it's about showing up differently over time. The next week, Travis spends 3 days writing a letter to Grace, throwing out draft after draft until he has something real. Marshall schedules a family session specifically for Travis to read it to her with everyone present. We sit in Marshall's office in our usual spots, and Travis pulls out the letter with shaking hands. He reads slowly, his voice cracking as he acknowledges how his threats ruined her birthday and made her feel invisible, how he turned every family moment into a crisis about himself. He lists specific examples going back years and takes responsibility without making it about his mental health or college stress. Grace listens with her arms crossed, her face carefully neutral. When he finishes, she thanks him for the apology, but says she's not ready to forgive yet, that she needs to see him act differently over time before she can trust him again. Marshall supports her boundary completely, while also validating Travis's effort, explaining that accountability doesn't come with guaranteed forgiveness. Travis accepts this with visible disappointment, but no manipulation, just nodding and folding up the letter. That same week, Mom and Dad start their own couples counseling with a different therapist to work on their parenting partnership. They come home from their first session looking exhausted, the kind of tired that comes from honest conversation instead of avoiding hard topics. Dad mentions over dinner that they're learning how they've enabled Travis by splitting into good cop and bad cop roles, how Mom's panic and Dad's escape fed into the cycle. They're working on presenting a united front and supporting each other instead of letting Travis divide them. The change shows up in small ways, like Dad backing up Mom's boundaries instead of undermining them, and Mom checking with Dad before making decisions about Travis's schedule. 2 weeks later, we do a proper redo of Grace's birthday. Nothing elaborate, just dinner at her favorite restaurant and a movie after. Travis comes to the dinner portion and actually participates in singing Happy Birthday, making an effort to be present without making it about himself. Then Dad takes him home to give Grace space for the movie with her friends. It's not perfect, and there's still awkwardness, but Grace gets to be the center of attention without crisis or drama interrupting. She thanks everyone afterward with real happiness in her voice, not the forced gratitude she used to perform when trying to keep peace. Travis meets with his guidance counselor the following week to talk about college options that aren't Ivy League. He comes home looking less devastated than I expected, actually kind of thoughtful. He mentions a program at the state university that focuses on environmental science, something that sounds genuinely interesting to him rather than just prestigious. I watch him start to separate his worth from external validation, to consider what he actually wants instead of what would look best. It's a small shift, but it feels significant. At our next family therapy session, Marshall announces a step-down plan. We'll move from weekly sessions to monthly check-ins starting next month, though the crisis protocol and safety plan stay active forever. The plan feels like progress and also like a reminder that we're managing a chronic situation rather than curing it. Marshall says this is realistic and healthy, that expecting Travis to never struggle again sets everyone up for failure. What matters is having systems in place for when struggles happen. I start working on my own college applications with clearer boundaries about distance. I'm looking at schools within 2 hours of home, close enough to help if there's a real emergency, but far enough that I'm not the first call for every Travis supervision shift. I sit down with Mom and Dad to talk about what my leaving will mean for the family system, how they'll need to maintain the structures we've built without making me responsible for holding everything together. They promise to hire a backup supervisor and keep the therapy appointments consistent. It's a hard conversation, but a necessary one. One morning a few weeks later, we're all at breakfast and it feels almost normal. Grace and Travis bicker about who ate the last bagel. Dad makes a terrible joke about the weather forecast. Mom reminds everyone about dentist appointments. There are no threats or crises, just ordinary family awkwardness and minor annoyances. The mundane peace feels precious after years of walking on eggshells, like we've earned the right to be boring. I catch Dad's eye across the table, and he gives me a small nod, acknowledging that we're still here, still trying, still making it work one ordinary morning at a time. That Thursday night, Travis and I end up on the couch watching some dumb comedy special because nothing else is on, and we're both too tired to go upstairs. The comedian makes a joke about families being like hostages who develop sympathy for their captors, and we both laugh at the exact same moment. It's not a polite laugh or a careful one, just genuine stupid humor that catches us both off guard. Travis glances at me, and I catch his eye, and for maybe 2 minutes we're just brothers watching TV and cracking up at the same ridiculous bit. The moment doesn't last because nothing does anymore. He gets up to grab water, and the careful distance slides back between us like it always does. But sitting there alone on the couch after he leaves, I realize that underneath all the therapy and safety plans and consequences, there's still something worth keeping. We're not fixed, and maybe we never will be, but we're not completely broken either. The next morning, Dad catches me before school and suggests we do a final systems check together. We walk through the house like we're doing a fire drill. He shows me the guidance counselor's direct number saved in his phone with a star next to it. The crisis hotline numbers are posted on the inside of the kitchen cabinet where anyone can see them, but they're not screaming at visitors. We check the medication cabinet in the hallway, and it's still locked with only Dad having the key. He opens it to show me Travis's prescriptions are organized by day, with a chart tracking when doses get taken. The sharp objects inventory is in a locked drawer in the garage, everything from kitchen knives to box cutters accounted for and secured. We end in the kitchen where the family contract hangs on the fridge under a magnet, all our signatures visible, including Travis's slightly messy one at the bottom. Dad runs his finger down the list of agreed responses and consequences, like he's memorizing them again. Everything is in place not because we think Travis will have another crisis tomorrow, but because we learned the hard way that hope needs structure. I feel something close to confidence looking at these systems we built, this framework that holds us all accountable. It's not perfect and it won't prevent every problem, but it's real, and it's there. That night I pull out my journal and write that our house used to be a prison, where Travis was both the warden and the only prisoner that mattered. Now it's not a prison, but it's not exactly free either. It's just a place with rules and consequences and people trying their best to be honest, instead of playing games with each other's fear. We're all still learning how to do this. Mom still gets anxious when Travis is quiet too long. Dad still checks the bathroom lock sometimes when Travis is in there. Grace still keeps her distance and guards her space. Travis still struggles with disappointment and has days where everything feels impossible. But the terror that used to fill every room has been replaced with something different. Structure. Small moments of real connection. Honesty instead of manipulation. It's not a fairy tale ending where everyone's healed and happy. It's just real hard work towards something better than what we had. Progress instead of perfection. And sitting here writing this, I think that might actually be enough. And that's the full breakdown. I try to keep every story short but useful, something you can actually take with you. If it gave you even one new idea, then it did its job. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.